Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So I figured I'd make a little quick refresher video on what exactly makes a tank in Tactics Ogre Reborn. Because I've seen kind of more of that notion recently of folks assuming that it's just strength and vitality that end up actually making a bulky unit, rather than the, well, frankly, wide variety of different things that can be used for tanking, because these are the least effective. The easiest way to think about this is, if somebody is going out for, like, let's say somebody's training for the army, right? Why are they training those, why are they going and training those particular muscle groups? It's for endurance. They're not going to flex their way out of getting shot, right? So, effectively, that's what focusing on these two is doing. It's essentially giving them a bit more endurance over the course of the fight. It's going to stave off a little bit of damage here and there. It's going to make them hit harder, but it's not going to be, let's say, providing the sheer bulk potential of something like Phalanx. When it comes to tanking in TOR, understand that there's a lot of different varieties of different types of attacks, and your ability to completely negate one thing or another is typically going to be more dependent on kind of situation than your direct stats. So for example, while those help, they will only be a very basic layer of defense. So like, let's say right here, we're doing one of the Heaven General fights, and what are the things that you have to consider at this point? What kind of obstacles are you looking at potentially tanking? So when you're dealing with Heaven General fights, typically there's two layers of attacks that you have to deal with. So let's say they start off with orbs, and these are going to provide a big explosion that is going to stun the units in that area. But it is an item in the item slot, meaning that it's going to count as physical damage despite being a magical explosion. So this means that anything, for example, providing a physical shield can completely nullify this. So for example, what's going to take that hit better? Murden over here would probably end up taking half or, most of his health here from eating one of those orbs, whereas let's say somebody like this guy over here would be able to, let's say, phalanx the damage and then essentially still wind up dealing with the stun. However, in that particular instance, the best units to actually tank that are going to be the ones with an evade. Because remember, evade will block all physical items entirely, meaning that an orb will simply get eaten by this. So if you, for example, stack several units with evade, let's say, you have a Lord running evade, you have your Buccaneer running evade, you have your Hoplite, you have your Matriarch or Patriarch, the Ivory Tower, odds typically will say that even if you don't end up getting your autos set up ahead of time, one of those is going to roll, right? And that's just the unit you throw forward. You pull everyone else back, you throw that unit towards the general direction where these guys are, which would have been over here. You get just within their range to go throw out that orb, and there you go. Suddenly that orb is no longer a factor. However, then we have the constant pressure from somebody like the Heaven General in this case, right? So in this case, we have the Tonitrus, which always makes me think Bloodborne. Anyway, even regardless of the fact that this came first, it's just, it always cracks me up. Anyway, so Tonitrus, though, notice that it says special. It's in the skill category, it's not in the spell category, which means that once again, this counts as a physical attack despite being a magical explosion. So, seeing as this counts as a skill attack instead of a magical attack, this means that once again, any units that happen to be running evade or anything along those lines can simply, tank this. Now, how do you take advantage of that? Well, I probably could have provided a better example here. I just kind of threw in a bunch of units I want to talk about into a map to discuss, but your best way to actually deal with that is to, once again, utilize the in-game mechanics. You see that this unit's a lightning unit, they're going to be doing a lightning attack, and so let's say we decided to go throw out somebody that has both evade and is a water element, and let's say we put them next to somebody bulky with another water element. Let's say we brought along our octopus, right? So this is going to be essentially the AI looking at this and saying, okay, look, I have this lightning physical attack, right? It does a set amount of damage, whatever else, and I have two units that are weak that are just kind of bulked up over here. Like, you throw the rest of your party over here, you see those units are bulked up over here. It's calculating those numbers as being pretty darn high on account of taking advantage of their elemental weakness, right? And so the evade simply just plinks it off. Somebody with a high health is typically just going to eat that hit no problem, right? So for this, we're going to also discuss bulk as far as tanking goes, because this is the sort of confusing thing about this. Oftentimes the units that get thrown ahead as, like, quote-unquote super bulky are going to be stuff like the White Knight or stuff like Berserkers or whatnot, in terms of, like, here's somebody with a ton of stats on them, But that's the thing, even with the best stats or whatever else, they're potentially thousands less health than the actual bulky units. So things like your birds, your beasts, whatever else, your heavy units typically are going to have health in the thousands. And regardless of their defense being lower, those numbers can only scale so high before they simply run out of steam, right? That they're effectively the large country defense of defensive units, where, simply put, there's just so much health in there that they can tank just about anything. Personally, I like to use Griffins for this, though in this case, I kind of made the mistake of bringing along my Giga Chicken, so it's kind of a bad example. But as far as bulk goes, just switching the element of a particular high health beast unit will be enough to tank just about anything. And this is essentially kind of doubly true for stuff like dragons, who potentially can go and reflect that damage back as well. So when you're looking for bulk, when you're looking for tank potential, the two most important things are going to be denial and health. So while vitality and stuff like that is useful, it's not everything. So for example, let's say somebody like this knight here, his Aegis helps, sure, but in most situations, the reason that he's really good at tanking things is simply picking up some auto cards and relying on Phalanx. This is why I've always argued against the notions of knights ever falling off, because this is the most universal defense skill in the entire game. It's 90% damage reduction against everything. It doesn't matter what it's coming from. It is 90% defense reduction against everything. So the only thing that could potentially stop them is something like Petrification, and it still lasts until the end of their turn. So the only thing that's actually preventing them from continuing this tanking in that particular situation is just the fact that their turn technically doesn't start to turn on auto. Now, for a quick bit of clarification here, why is stuff like that still around in older guides or whatever else for older versions and or, let's say, the One Vision mod? Simply put, because these stats, part of the reason that they were changed for Reborn, and part of the reason that they were so useful before, is that a few points in Vitality or Strength could vastly change how damage in general went. Like, if you take a digit off of all numbers in this game, that's more or less how they were functioning back in PSP there. So this basically meant that a few points in Vitality could vastly change what it actually took to take somebody down. A few points in Vitality, for example, in the One Vision mod, is what's provided from heavy armor, and typically that will result in somebody feeling extraordinarily bulky. However, in this case, since everything's kind of diluted a little bit, you typically will see far bigger breakthroughs happening, because not only is your defense in general not necessarily going to be kind of bulking away hits as much, but additionally you've got elemental breakthroughs happening constantly. Units having, bonuses against each other is going to be a very, very regular thing. So this means that there are going to be a lot of those cases where, like, simply put, your units are getting their defense completely broken through, so it doesn't really necessarily matter that they resisted, 20, 30 points of that damage from their extra vitality. It's not going to be the thing that makes the difference, So either way, with that all being said, there's also a lot of different types of ways that you could potentially avoid those attacks in the first place, because not everybody gets evade. So one of the main things I want to bring about here, or just talk about here, is actually going to be your items, because your items are going to be a very, very effective tanking method on just about everybody. And I wish that I had the time to finish editing the Union Level 0 run at this point. Soon, I'm getting to it, but when it comes to being able to, let's say, tank multiple hits, very few things are as useful as something like Jewel of the Avatar. Because think about it. Like, let's say a unit let's say there's a comparison between two different units, right? So, like, let's say your caster's getting hit for 250 because he doesn't have that defense, but your melee unit is getting hit for 200 because he's got that extra defense, right? And let's say they're attacked several times in a row. Will it make a difference? Like, will that difference in numbers between them potentially save Murden here from getting completely overrun? Maybe not necessarily, because potentially they can't avoid all those hits. They just end up getting overrun anyway. But now let's say you instead give them something like parry layers, something like dodge, right? That is guaranteed 20% chance that something will dodge right from the get-go, and additionally another 21% chance from the weapon itself. That the combination of those parries and dodges is going to provide a lot more bulk to that unit than potentially something like something like higher vitality or strength, right? And again, just try using Jewels of the Avatar on somebody whenever they're getting bullied. If somebody's getting bullied by archers, that's when you'd use a Filter of Ashes. But these are all things to potentially consider when going and making a defensive unit. Because, for example, again, everything goes back to those physical and magical categories. Anything physical can be dodged with Jewel of the Avatar 20% of the time. So you just pop one of these suckers on here, activate it, it's like 150 bucks from the store, very cheap, and this will typically last about half the fight. And from then on, like as soon as they get into the kind of just overall skirmishing range or whatever else, this is going to constantly provide a benefit for going and avoiding attacks, whether they're finishers, physical attacks, whether there's stuff like Tonitrus over there or whatever else. Anything that counts as physical, it will dodge. Physical shields, stuff like Nullify Strike or Evade or Ivory Tower, those are going to be obviously very effective for going and getting rid of those regular attacks as well. Because tanking something to the face is all well and good, but it's better to just make sure it never gets there in the first place. Additionally, do I actually have an example of this here? I guess not, but I guess we'll use him as an example right now because he's hit with stun. This is the other thing that's very effective for mitigating damage, especially if you're in the early game. This is why there's a ton of value in something like the Bowgun +1 on an archer. It's not the damage, it's the fact that I believe it's 50% of the time, stun will simply say, hey, this unit doesn't get a turn. And it's a lot more effective to simply prevent that unit from acting than it is to go and tank the hit to the face. So let's say you activate your dodges or sidesteps or what have you. You have the enemy unit stunned. You have, let's say, a boss that's hit with False Strike or even something like Weaken. If you have a boss that's hitting particularly hard, rather than tanking it, one of the better options is to simply hit them with something like a Brand of the Sacrifice or Dragon Fire Breath in order to give them a 50% reduction to that physical offense. Now, this is very noticeable for physical things, especially if you're on something like the Oz boss fight or whatever else. This will reduce their offense by 50%, and that 50% is oftentimes enough to make those stats matter. Oftentimes you will be able to just completely eat the hits of any unit affected by this, and it typically lasts a very long time. Again, it's just very useful to have around. Same thing for something like a Dynasty King's Meat, if obviously this is in the other direction, but 50% breach defense is... this isn't actually lowering their defense. Fear does that, but something like Dynasty King's Meat is 50% additional offense versus that unit. So that's going to matter quite a decent bit. So anyways, as far as tanking goes, just to recap, stats are nice, but they are not everything. Skills are the best thing for dealing with this stuff, if you happen to have them. Stuff like Phalanx, stuff like Evade, stuff like Ivory Tower are basically second to none. Well, I guess for magical attacks, you got stuff like Intercession as well. It depends on what you're fighting there. But those are going to be your first and best layer as far as avoiding absolutely everything. Your second layer that you should always keep in mind is going to be your guaranteed buff items. So stuff like your Jewel of the Avatar, your Filter of Ashes, your Basin of Time, stuff like that. Like Basin of Time will just reduce all incoming damage for physical stuff. Stuff like a Jewel of the Avatar will always guarantee 20% dodge odds for physical stuff. For ranged attacks, you've got that Filter of Ashes. You've also got the resistance item over here, your Crystallized Flame. There's not many bosses that this is useful against, simply because magic is largely unresisted, so you probably want to pair it with a magic impairing item. You probably want your book for that. But please remember to look through your shop for these items. They are exceptionally good for saving units in different situations. Like this guy got hit with a breach at one point, so just ended up going and getting his defense up for a while, which ended up saving him. True, the Basin of Time is not nearly as good as the breach, but if you don't have a way to get rid of that breach, it can be exactly what you need. Just remember that pairing elements against stuff that they're strong against is going to be very important. Having those tanky skills up there is very important. And lastly, area denial is very important. So for example, we'll use this guy as an example, part of the reason that I'm using this right now. Like this guy is not simply blocking this tile right here. He is effectively blocking this whole area from anyone getting through. This guy over here is not only blocking, movement right here, he's making it awkward for everything around here to move around. This unit is invisible, so it doesn't really matter for them. Having somebody off to the side, tempting them with that back attack for right here, will mean that somebody might take a longer move to get to their back. Because remember, speed is also important when it comes to tanking stuff. So anytime you can tempt the AI into taking a longer move or using a shield bash to finish somebody off instead of a basic attack, that is time that you are gaining to potentially save yourself from another attack in the future. Okay? Anyway, so hopefully this was a helpful little rundown on how to tank in Tactics Ogre Reborn. And hey, I did actually manage to make it about 15 minutes long. Okay, good. Fantastic. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Take care.